In its time as a games maker, Sega has been responsible for some very memorable software. It doesn't really matter what genres you prefer or whether you did your gaming on a console or a computer, Sega's name was everywhere. Of course, the best games would give way to more releases, which formed a series, and that's the basis of today's topic. We will be looking at some of Sega's best game series and choosing just one among them to represent the pinnacle of the IP. I was careful in choosing this list and only included games that I felt had a legitimate series and not just a single sequel or a remake. There needed to be real evolution in the gameplay and design, differentiating each release from the one before it. We've got over a dozen game series to go over, so let's get started. We start with the venerable Golden Axe, to which there are numerous entries across a few different genres. There's the original arcade version and its many home ports. There's the Genesis exclusive sequels, the arcade exclusive sequel, Master System and Game Gear action and adventure offerings, and even a fighting game. But which one of these did it the best? The Genesis trilogy will always have a special place in my heart, and I wanted the Revenge of Death Adder at home so bad I could taste it. But when it comes to the most well-made product, I gotta give it to the 8-bit adventure, Golden Axe Warrior. There is no question it was heavily inspired by Zelda, and that inspiration created one hell of a memorable experience. Death Adder is still the bad guy, you must reclaim the stolen crystals that protect the people, and the action-heavy gameplay never gets boring. Visually, it was a standout among that generation and easily destroyed the Nintendo Classic that inspired it. The only thing I never understood was that at its release in 1991, why Sega didn't create a Genesis version of it as well. Spruced up color and detail with a new FM soundtrack would have really added some much needed variety to Sega software offerings that year. It's a real shame that never happened, but as far as legacy goes, this game is still fantastic stuff. There have been 4 mainline Streets of Rage titles released in that series' history, not counting the 8-bit versions of the first 2 games. Picking just one of these is insanely difficult, primarily because they all did certain things extremely well. Was it the atmosphere and soundtrack of the original that was best? Or did you prefer the upgraded graphics and expanded roster of the second one? Maybe you were in the camp that loved the gameplay evolution in Part 3. Heck, even I bet there were plenty of you out there that couldn't get enough of the combo heavy Part 4. There is genuine appeal in all of them, but if I was left with just one, the choice has to be the original. It's true from a gameplay perspective, it wasn't nearly as fleshed out as its sequels, nor did it visually compete with any of them. Where the original flat out does it better is in the environments, music, and the incredible ability to become the bad guy at the end. I know some of you are probably sitting there going crazy, pulling your hair out at the prospect of the original being chosen over the sequels, but I stand by it. When I play the first one, it feels like I'm very much in those areas of the city, and every music track would be playing along as an oral descriptor of the mood around me. There is a powerful appeal in that, and it makes the original stand out more to me. I concede the sequels easily did more in a number of areas, but when it comes to the intangibles and mood they set, Part 1 sits alone at the top. Streets of Rage was gonna be tough to choose just one, but when it comes to the Shinobi series, it quickly turned agonizing. On the Genesis alone, there are 3 classic entries that are among that console's greatest. Then there are the arcade-related games, the digitized Saturn adventure, the PS2 exclusives. I even thought the 3DS game had its appeal. Picking just one was not easy. I almost struck the series from the list entirely because I didn't want to leave out a personal favorite. There are times when each one scratches an itch perfectly. How can I have just one walk away the winner? And that winner has to be Shinobi 3. Pound for pound, it's one of Sega's best efforts on the Genesis. The visuals, the sound, the gameplay, the stage design, it's all an impeccable effort and easily one of the best games of its day. To wrap up that great experience, it also has difficulty settings that makes it accessible to most skill levels. It doesn't matter if you're a budding ninja on your first adventure or a die-hard assassin praying for conflict. Shinobi 3 has what you need. The Revenge of Shinobi is well made and has a ton of nostalgic value, but Part 3 deserves this win thanks to its overall excellence. Echo the Dolphin was a big part of Sega's push with the Genesis after Sonic showed up. On the surface, it looked like a cutesy kids game where you swam around and solved puzzles, but this candy-coated veneer hid an incredibly adult story about an alien race that harvested your family for food. It was also a game that pulled no punches with its difficulty, and its final few stages are among some of the hardest on the platform. There are a number of Echo games from Sega spanning a few different hardware platforms and console generations. Looking back at these games, I have to pick the original as the best one, because it's such an unexpected game. It was damn near a survival horror the way it was designed, and as the settings and story got darker, a profound sense of dread set in that let you know exactly how bleak things were looking. Some of you will likely choose the original Genesis version for nostalgia, but for me, I think I have to go with the Sega CD release and its incredible soundtrack and extra levels. It elevated the overall experience to something truly incredible. For a stretch of time, Alex Kidd was used as Sega's mascot, a sort of answer to Nintendo's Mario. Back in the late 1980s into the early 1990s, he appeared in a number of titles, and I honestly didn't care for many of them. In fact, I'll just admit it here that I hated most of them. Going back and playing some of these today is rough, especially that awful arcade game in its home port. For that reason, my best in series pick is actually a spin-off of the main series, Alex Kidd in Shinobi World. My goodness, does this play so much better than anything else in this series. I mean, it's not even close. You can do so much more, attack so much more efficiently, and it's got the looks and sounds to be considered a classic. As its namesake implies, it's heavily inspired by Shinobi, taking a number of cues from its enemies, stages, and bosses. It works surprisingly well, and is easily the best that series had ever been. Going into Afterburner, I thought I had it figured out without even thinking about it. I mean, Afterburner 2, the arcade game, was easily the best it's ever been, right? Well, hold on there, because after looking at some of the games connected to the series, I realized that might not be the case. I mean, we did have Afterburner Climax, the absolutely gorgeous Sega Lindbergh arcade game that gave the series a time control element. Then there was the PSP Afterburner Black Falcon. That one added a bunch of different missions and customizations that deepen the experience quite a bit. But when it comes to the best playing entry into the series, I have to go with 1991's Strike Fighter. This was released exclusively in Japan on Sega's Y arcade board, a follow-up to G-Lock Air Battle that uses a similar viewpoint from the cockpit. Don't be fooled, however, because everything else is tried and true Afterburner. I imagine that many of you have never played this one, and finding an arcade cabinet in the wild is akin to discovering a needle in a haystack. But I highly recommend you check it out on MAME, which does a decent job of playing it these days. It's fast, fun, has a great soundtrack, and doesn't bury you under an absurd difficulty. I also love that superscalar technology that seems to age like fine wine. Columns was Sega's puzzle series while Tetris was selling so well. While it never eclipsed Tetris in popularity, it did see numerous sequels itself, and was updated far more than most realize. While I have a soft spot for the original game, it's Columns 3 that gets the nod for the best in series. This was Sega's attempt to bring the series into serious competitive multiplayer. While there is a single-player story mode, it is based on playing against AI-controlled opponents. The meat of the game is in its couch co-op multiplayer, however. There are handicap and free-for-all modes that supports up to 5 simultaneous players. In other words, old Columns 3 is a party game, and a damn good one at that. Newer games would come along and add similar features and improve the visuals, but I don't think the series ever got any better than it did right here. Sega's Fantasy Zone was a horizontally scrolling shoot-'em-up that was really unique at its release in 1986. It implemented a money system that allowed you to buy power-ups. It allowed you to control which direction the screen scrolled. And perhaps best of all, it had a slew of screen-filling bosses at a time when such a thing was rare. There's been some great ports and sequels to the series over the years, but as far as the best, I gotta go with Super Fantasy Zone for the Sega Genesis. Shockingly, this wasn't even developed by Sega, but instead it was Sunsoft that crafted this masterpiece. It goes back to the roots of the series and drops all that Warp Zone nonsense from Part 2. The art style is gorgeous here and uses every drop of color the Genesis was capable of. The bosses return, the upgrades are back, and Sunsoft nailed the soundtrack. Sadly, this was never released physically in North America back then, so if you want it, you'll need it for the Japanese Mega Drive or one of the PAL editions. Hang On was a great racer back in the day, and it peaked with the arcade version of Super Hang On in 1987. There's no difficulty choosing this one because everything around it is a lesser experience. The home ports, of course, never captured the sheer technical beauty of the arcade, and the 3D update for the Saturn didn't play as well. That leaves Super Hang On as the best in series easily, with only the limited edition in 1991 offering any argument. Unlike Hang On, the House of the Dead as a series is almost universally awesome. so picking a single game is really tough. Do I go with the original in all its B-movie mastery? What about Part 2 and its perfect home conversion so soon after the arcade? There were also some great arcade games that showed up later. The House of the Dead 4 and Scarlet Dawn both had a popcorn appeal that just made you want to sit back and see where the ride would take you. The entire series was really some of the best times I ever had with a light gun, but if I gotta choose just one, I have to go with the original arcade version of the House of the Dead. It's true later games looked better and added new gameplay mechanics, but there is something about that initial trip that is just untouchable for me. The music, the setting, the enemies, and the fact it was never released at home, 100% arcade perfect, makes it something special. Every Sega fan out there knows the Outrun games in some capacity. If, like me, you were there from the beginning, enamored by its love letter to driving and the scenery that made it special. There were, of course, many ports, sequels, and spin-offs over the years. I absolutely adored Outrunners and its over-the-top locations, drivers, and vehicles. That was a sprite scaler that rivaled most early polygon racers back then. There were also some excellent home ports of Outrun, like the Saturn version, which added a mode that was even smoother than the arcade original. But it was Outrun 2 in 2003 that took the series to the next level of fun and appeal. I don't really care which version of it you choose. All versions of Outrun 2 were absolutely incredible. Power sliding around corners felt like a natural extension of your will, almost like you were the nerve center of the vehicle itself. You still get to choose your route, avoid traffic, and your girlfriend is along for the ride. The sound and visuals are absolutely drop-dead beautiful, even all these years later. Should you find one in the arcade, sit your ass down and soak up one of Sega's very best creations. Other racers would come and go, but I never came close to having the same level of fun as I did with Outrun 2. One of the most unfortunate casualties of Sega's chaotic history is many of their iconic series fell to the wayside rather quickly. The Panzer Dragoon titles only saw 4 mainline entries before it disappeared, or roughly 7 years of any real development. I would have loved to have seen many more, even if things needed to go the RPG or adventure route like Saga. When it comes to my favorite, however, I easily choose the first Panzer Dragoon for its glorious soundtrack, its impeccable cinematics, and its timing as one of the best early titles available for the Sega Saturn. I know, Panzer II added new mechanics and improved the visuals. Saga added an entire RPG and strategy system, and Orta was a masterpiece all the way around. But there was nothing like the first game in 1995. Aside from the gameplay that allowed you to defend yourself in 360 degrees, the presentation was otherworldly. It used impeccable art inspired by the designs of Mobius. The soundtrack was on a level of the best Hollywood films, and the locations felt like a world recovering from a major catastrophe. I respect the others, but when I want to take a trip in this universe, I want to take it here. Magical gets thrown around a lot when describing entertainment, but this is a game that truly earns that description. Sega's Phantasy Star was an early titan among their releases in the late 1980s and early 1990s. They were the closest thing to a Japanese RPG as the company made at the time. Though the barrier of entry was steep thanks to a pretty extreme level of difficulty, I found myself enjoying most of them. The first on the Sega Master System was a stunner with outstanding color and some great first-person animation. The second was an early Genesis game that again looked and sounded great, plus it had a rather mature story focused on loss and grief. There was a big change in the later years when the series moved over to a hack-and-slash action RPG design that was heavily focused on multiplayer. I didn't care for these early on, but eventually came to like them quite a bit. That creates something of a hardship for choosing which one is the best in series. Do I go with the classic Phantasy Star games, or do I choose one of the newer style? That's tough, but I think Phantasy Star 4 wins this one overall. There's hundreds of spells, awesome visuals, vehicles to procure to add to your combat potential, and a fantastic soundtrack contained in its 24 megabits of ROM. It's a big step up from the mistakes made in Part 3, and it improves on everything that made Part 2 a winner, including a story that was the best of the classic design. It remains extremely playable today, and one of Sega's best. Sega Rally was an off-road arcade racer that was sort of a companion to Daytona USA. Done on Sega's Model 2 arcade board, it was a real beauty back then, and the gameplay was the kind of thing you often could only get in a Sega game. The popularity of it spawned a few sequels and home exclusives, and I can honestly say all of them were fun in their own way. Sega Rally 2 expanded on the original with more cars and locations. Sega Rally 3 gave us a big uptick in graphics, and Sega Rally 2006 tried to mimic the features of the more simulation-style games in the genre. But you know, choosing just one is easy, and that's the Saturn port of the first Sega Rally. This will likely be the only instance where I would choose a home port over an arcade release when given the option. The Saturn game had better music, a better presentation with replay options, and frankly, I thought it played better than the arcade. There was something about the suspension and how the car bounced on the different surfaces. You could damn near feel it through the control pad. That was all on top of the fact that the Saturn version looked incredible and ran at a rock-solid 30 frames per second. Sure, that wasn't quite arcade perfect, but for a 1995 home conversion, it was still no less impressive.
Easy left, baby. Medium left. Medium right, check one. Easy left, baby. Easy left, baby. Long, medium right.
I have some powerful nostalgia for the Virtua Fighter games. From the joy of discovering the first arcade, all the way to Virtua Fighter 5 and its home releases. Seeing that second game in the arcade for the first time, watching that bridge go by as I fought, is a core memory I don't think I'll ever forget. Seeing the uneven surfaces and expanded arenas of Virtua Fighter 3 was special, and Virtua Fighter 4 has to be one of the best late arcade experiences I've ever had. Sega thought Virtua Fighter 5 was so good it's been updating it for some 20 years now. I know all of you have your favorites, but mine is the arcade version of Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution. This Naomi 2 release was dropped in 2002 as an upgrade to the first Virtua Fighter 4. It has a bunch of tweaks to the stages, moves, rings, and adds 2 new fighters. It was brought home to the PlayStation 2 in a really solid port, but the arcade still looks quite a bit better. In terms of fighting styles, balance, characters, and locations, I don't think the series ever really improved on it. There was another arcade update called Virtua Fighter 4 Final Tuned, but to date, that game has never been ported outside of the original Japanese arcade edition.
Fight 2! Ready? Go! KO!
Daytona USA was one of those games that came along at the right time, with the right gameplay, with the right presentation, and it set the arcade on fire. There was nothing like it in terms of gameplay, a mix of drifting and timing that felt wonderful from the moment you took the wheel. Its popularity, of course, gave way to other games in the series, both arcade and at home. There were a few different home versions of it that added new content, and an arcade sequel that dialed the visuals up to the next level. But which one was best? Which one remains the most memorable? As much as I love the look of Daytona 2, I have to say the original arcade version of Daytona USA is still the gift that keeps on giving. It's still gorgeous, still runs buttery smooth, and it still has the gameplay and music that just feels right every single time. Like many First Go Sega properties, everything just clicked here in just the right place, and it remains such a great game to this very day. It's been modified and updated numerous times, but when it comes to the version I want to play again and again, the first arcade game will always win the day. Our final series is none other than Sega's very own flagship, Sonic the Hedgehog. There have been dozens of these games over the years, starting with the classic 16-bit two-dimensional titles, all the way up to fully three-dimensional polygon games. It has been Sega's most updated series by far the last 25 years or so picking just one of these is rather difficult. Do I go with an old school version of Sonic, or do I choose one of the newfangled modern releases? The choice isn't as easy as you think. Despite the quality of the series being all over the place at times, there have been some great games, especially when the series would mix old and new elements. Something like Sonic Generations scratched that itch for both. Then there was Sonic Mania, which took the old formula and cranked it up with modern bells and whistles to make it something entirely new. But when I think pure fun factor, pure replayability, Sonic never got any better than it did in Sonic 2 for the Sega Genesis. No doubt nostalgia powers this choice for me, but there is no question that Sonic 2 is a well-made game. The sound and visuals are nice, the stage design is epic, and it was the very first time Super Sonic showed up, which actually rewarded you for collecting all those damn Chaos Emeralds. Sonic 3 and Knuckles added even more, but I don't think the Sonic games ever really surpassed everything that was done so well in Sonic 2. So there we go, my picks for Sega's best games in each of its mainstay series. I'd love to see what games you would have chosen down in the comments. I mentioned it a few times during the video, but one of the unfortunate side effects of Sega's rocky history is that many of these games have completely disappeared, or have seen few updates since Sega was a hardware maker. There was a time when the prolific nature of Sega's publishing and arcade businesses meant that games came out at a breakneck pace. but that has changed substantially in the years since. Now we often have to wait for Sega to work with an outside company to get anything new with their classic IPs, and then it can be a crapshoot as to whether it's actually any good or not. With the coming new energy releases like Shinobi Art of Vengeance, hopefully all that changes and we start to see some real sustained quality. These games certainly deserve it. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.